Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very, very special International Women's Day celebration. My name is Dr. Kim Compoc. I teach history at University of Hawaii, West Oahu. And I'm here with Dr. Margo Okazawa-Rey, our very special guest speaker. Yes, so much to say today. Very glad to see all of you here. Very glad to see folks from my own campus, from University of Hawaii, Manoa, some folks from California, some folks from Quebec, some folks from Hamilton College, some from California. So just to acknowledge how many people are excited to have you here with us, Margo. I just want to begin with our land acknowledgement. And we actually have an oli that we sing here on our campus. I'm not much of a singer, so I'm just going to play this very beautiful, this very beautiful song. Bear with me just a moment as I make sure the sound is on. It's just about a minute and a half to just acknowledge that we're on Hawaiian land. There we go. And for those of you who don't know the Hawaiian, I'll just read this. This is written by Pu'u Zablan from my campus, Mele Honu'uli'uli. Mele means song, Honu'uli'uli is the place where our campus is located. Here, my ka, Palehua, glorious mountain, the mountain that dwells in the heavens. Kapolei is our beloved hill, the hill that sits on the land. Kapapa'apuhi is our pond, the pond that resides at the sea. There is Honu'uli'uli, our beloved land in Ewa. Greetings to all of the descendants and people, the proud people of this land. So yes, just a reminder that we are on Hawaiian land as we organize this important event today. Of course, Hawaii is the traditional land of the Kanaka Maoli people, the Native Hawaiians, and sadly, Hawaii remains under U.S. occupation. And so today, International Women's Day, let our words uplift the possibility that we will speak of that occupation in the past tense someday. If you would like to identify yourself in the chat, please do. Also feel free to express your solidarity with the struggle here in Hawaii for Kanaka Maoli, and also for the African-American struggle, also for the Korean struggle, also for the Palestinian struggle. We're going to be thinking about internationalism, and International Women's Day. So yeah, feel free to use the chat for that purpose. Let me see here. Well, first, a little bit about International Women's Day. I know you have a lot to say about this, Margo, but I'll just launch into this sort of the basics. International Women's Day was first celebrated in 1911 after an International Socialist Women's Conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. The year prior, after being inspired by American socialist women who had organized a National Women's Day. In 1911, delegates from 17 countries met to demand and agitate for economic and voting rights for women. German Claire Zetkin was the first to propose the idea of the International Women's Day. The following year, over 1 million women marched in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. For many years, it was only kind of celebrated in socialist countries. Then in 1967, women in Chicago revived that tradition in the US context. In 1975, the United Nations began recognizing International Women's Day. So yeah, we want to acknowledge the radical socialist roots of International Women's Day. And of course, we are centering an internationalism that recognizes Indigenous peoples' right to sovereignty. We're centering a vision of International Women's Day that is inclusive of gender expansive people. We're centering a feminism that is inclusive of all those impacted by the violence of heteropatriarchy and the gender binary. We want to thank, first of all, our ASL interpreters, Kate and Sarah from Isle Interpret. Thank you for being here and helping us make this event more inclusive. We want to thank all those who co-sponsored this event with us today, the Office of Student Equity, Excellence, and Diversity. The event is also co-sponsored by my department, University of Hawaii, West Oahu Humanities Division, Women's Voices, Women Speak, which is here in Honolulu, Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine at University of Hawaii, students protesting against militarism, or SPAM, at University of Hawaii, Manoa, Hawaii Peace and Justice, Aloha Joy Devoto. Yes, all of you, thank you so much for being here. And now I will introduce Dr. Margo Okazawa-Rey, who is a professor emerita of San Francisco State University. She's an activist and educator working on issues of militarism, armed conflict, and violence against women examined intersectionally. She has long-standing activist commitments in South Korea and Palestine, working closely with Durebang, My Sister's Place, and the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling, respectively. She is also a founding member of the International Women's Network Against Militarism, which is how I know Margo, wearing our t-shirt right now, and Women for Gender Security. He serves on the International Board of Peace Women across the globe in Bern, Switzerland, and is the president of the board of directors of the Association for Women's Rights in Development. She has a long list of publications, some of which I circulated with the Zoom link. I'll just talk about a couple of those. Denationizing Coalition and Solidarity Politics for U.S. Anti-Militarist Feminists, which is published in Social Justice in 2020. Gendered Lives, International Perspectives, which is now in its 7th printing, I think. Is that right? With Oxford University Press.
And that's it.
And that's it. That's it. Okay, just one last thing. She has an amazing radio program on KPFA called Women's Magazine, which features interviews with feminist leaders from around the world. She's also an accomplished DJ, and she promises to share a song with us at the end. If you please will stay with us. Let me just give you this most expensive imaginary lei for you, Margo. I'm putting it over you right now. Please help me welcome Dr. Margo Okazawa-Rey.
Thank you so much, so much. It's so wonderful to be here. And I want to thank everyone who's made this possible. You've already named some, but I also want to underscore, especially our interpreters, without whom there will be less inclusive participation. And I know organizing these things is not easy. Kim, you and I know this from our latest venture together. So I know that that International Women's Day is not a very big deal in the US. But in other countries, and I think especially from what I can see, countries of the global South, it's become a big deal, right? And so I wanted to just show you very quickly some posters I got from some of my pals in different parts of the world. So you can see the variety of perspectives on it. So I'll do that. And then I think my main charge is to talk about my experience with the Combahee River Collective, and that's just the starting place. And then we can go from there. Sky's the limit. You all asked some amazing questions, which we will have to discuss together. And I'm really here also to listen to you all and find out what matters to you, you know, as much as my own kind of thinking and stuff. So, and I want you to, well, you already did this, the hard questions. So let's just start with a quick, view of the slideshow, and it's just very quick. Can you see it?
No, I do
No,
have
I
your,
have to
your
share
screen
first.
share. Yeah, okay, good.
So basic. Okay. Okay. So can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, this obviously is from Palestine. Where am I? I'm not seeing it. I'm not able to advance the slide. Okay, you know what? Forget that. I don't want to waste time on it.
Okay.
I'll send it to Professor Compoc, and you can, you know, post it wherever you post it. But I thought it was really interesting, the range of things that I got from Palestine, from the Kurdish women's movement, from Brazil, from Indonesia, you know, and a couple from Palestine, which is where I am right now. But it's so interesting that the range of things that folks are organizing around. So militarism and colonization here in Palestine, to domestic workers' rights in Indonesia. And then, you know, I got some of those other fluffy things like, and fluff is good sometimes, okay? I'm not, you know, just dissing those, but, you know, things like um, uh, lift up the women in your lives, you know, those kind of micro things are also absolutely important too. So what I'm hoping today to do is to really, in our conversation, talk about the relationship between the interpersonal, the structural, institutional, community, and the global, as I talk about the work of the Combahee River Collective. And I also want to really honor the roots of the International Women's Day, right? Which is socialist. I consider myself a socialist. I consider myself a worker, even though highly paid, good working conditions, and all of that. Nonetheless, I'm part of a growing labor force that's also contingent, right? With all the part-time work, you know, etc. And I think we professors have sort of kind of led ourselves into believing that we're not workers. And you are, I think, unless you come from inherited wealth or you are born into the ruling class. Anyway, that's my kind of socialist honoring the International Women's Day. So let me just start with a little bit of history, and interpreters, please tell me if I start talking too quickly, because I have a tendency to get excited. Anyway, so the Combahee River Collective is known to many people, not just in the US, for people who are connected both to academic settings and also to you know, grassroots organizations in some places. I'm always amazed when somebody from some far out place like Kurdistan said to me, "Oh, you're part of the Combahee River Collective." And I think I want to make just a couple of things really clear, which is that the Combahee River Collective is what it is mostly because of the statement and the thinking that that statement represents, our thinking that that statement represents. So back in 1976, 77, Zila Eisenstein commissioned some members of our collective to actually write a statement for her edited collection on socialist feminism, right? And the three people who wrote the statement were Demita Frazier, Barbara Smith, and Beverly Smith. So they actually put our thoughts in writing, right? And our name is on it as the Black Feminist Statement by the Combahee River Collective. Now, you all know that you can write things, books, anything, that a lot of things just go nowhere, right? So that statement, even though it appeared in a cutting edge book, it would have gone nowhere unless back then women's studies professors and later women and gender studies professors, ethnic studies professors, sociology professors started assigning the reading, right? Otherwise, it would have just been finished in Zila's book, you know, and accessible only to the people who read that book. So all this to say that professors, academics, we in the academy do have a role to play in activating knowledge, right? As in the case of the Combahee River Collective statement, like assigning it to your students and having them say, wow, this still makes sense, you know, 45 years later. It's kind of scary to me and humbling because one, things haven't changed that much, right, in a sense, but it's also reflects the really good collective thinking that we did, right? And for me, it's a really good case for doing things collectively, which the academy just doesn't, you know, take too seriously, right? To get tenure and all that, you have to have single author, blah, blah. You don't need to hear that. So that's one thing, that the significance of the paper itself was created by the professors who assigned the paper. And obviously it still resonates. So, you know, people are using it and you all are interested in the collective. The second point about the collective is that it was very decentralized in a sense, and we were not a formal organization, you know. And at that time, in the mid 70s and later in the early 80s, nonprofit organizations were not the way that women were and feminists were doing the work, right? So we were in Boston at the time, and the feminists and activists in Boston, we just did things as things needed to be done, right? There wasn't this whole proliferation of 501c3 organizations. We were mostly all volunteers in the Rape Crisis Center or the domestic violence shelters. There were things like the Green Light Project in Dorchester, for example, where we put in green lights on our porches to say that this is a safe space in case some woman was in danger, whether, you know, in their homes or on the street, right? So a lot of the way we did things was collectively and organized around self-help. The Combahee River Collective all total had about 8 retreats. So most of the work happened around the retreats. And everybody in the collective was involved in some kind of activist work, right? So the knowledges that we created were rooted not just in our own kind of academic thinking or theoretical work, but also connected to the activist kinds of things we were doing at the time. And I was in Boston at the time and involved in school desegregation, anti-violence work that the school desegregation created such violence. So, and then Barbara Smith, for example, was involved in committee to end sterilization abuse, all kinds of things. And so our knowledge really was an accumulation of our respective activist work. And, we ranged in age from 20 to about 27. Right? And I was in the middle. I must have been like 25 or something. And the other thing about the collective that's really important is that we had fun, right? We played, we cooked a lot. Barbara Smith and Beverly Smith had a reputation for making the best cookies on the planet, right? And so forth. So, there's a lot of talk these days about joy or pleasure activism. I don't even know what the phrase is, but we did that, right? We also lived with lots of contradictions within the group, and I don't need to talk about that here. But there's no clear space to stand, right? Given our socialization in a capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist, et cetera, culture, right? None of us stands in a clean place, right? And so I think the good thing about the collective was that we were actually willing to learn together, right? And so that's something. I want to also just clear two things that's in the statement that sometimes gets mistaken. One is there's a line that says, when Black women are free, all women will be free. And by that, we did not mean that we were the most oppressed, right? Because if you read further on, or I can't remember if it's before or after, we also talk that for us to be free, there would need to be transformation in the institutions and the structures, right? And because those are racist, etc., homophobic, heterosexist, that then if we transform the institutions and the structures, then other people who are in very specific ways marginalized and oppressed could also have a chance to be liberated, like Black women would, could be, right? So that's one thing. So we were not doing this oppression Olympic, as far as I can remember. It's going on 50 years. But anyway, so I hope my memory serves me correctly. The second point is the point about identity politics, right? We were not talking about identity in essentialist terms, right? That yes, we're Black, lesbian, et cetera, but we were not saying that those are pure categories, right? And that if you're, what we meant by identity politics is actually, I would say it differently now, I would say the politics of identity, right? That however we configure, like in my case, I'm African American, I'm Japanese, and Japanese from Japan. My mother is from Japan. My father is African American, right? Working class. My grandmother was a domestic worker in Chicago. My mother was an upper middle class Japanese woman, fell in love with this Black guy, military Black guy during the occupation of Japan, right? And so what I've had to do, and members of the collective as well, and people subsequently, is I am Black and I'm also these other categories. But more important, I'm aligned with certain kind of structural power relations, right? And I didn't really see this until I went to South Korea on a Fulbright. And maybe many people won't remember this, but in the early 90s, there was a lot of tension between Korean immigrant merchants and African American community members. And there was violence, tension, etc. I wanted to go to Korea to find out what Korean people learned about Black people, Black Americans, before they came to Korea, before they came to the US. I could not believe that they learned everything here, right, about Black folks. So I went, that was the research, the Fulbright research thing that I got. I got off the plane and I noticed a few things in the first couple of weeks. One is the massive US military presence. I had no idea, right? I had no idea. At the time, there were over 100 US bases and like even these small facilities, right? And there was one right in the middle of Seoul, the capital of South Korea. And I'm looking around and thinking, oh my goodness, where am I? Apart from all the cultural stuff, but where am I that there's this massive military presence? And then the other thing was I couldn't speak Korean, but I could speak Japanese. And I realized that I could speak to a certain generation of Koreans in Japanese because they had been colonized by Japan, which I did not know about, right? So here I am, this mixed race Black woman, standing in the middle of Seoul. Back in the States, I'm in this kind of oppressed category in quotes, right? Based on, gender and all that. But there, in that context, right, I actually embody two imperial powers. An old regime of Japanese imperialism, and the current regime of the US, right? And in that moment, I realized two things. One is I couldn't just claim marginalization, right? That I had to take seriously the category of nation, right? As an important part of how I'm classified, even though I'm against the US state and all of that, I could be a good American, in quotes, I'm still attached to it structurally. So I had to really think about that. In the Combahee River Collective statement, when we wrote about capitalism and imperialism, we didn't talk about it as any of us sort of part of that, right? We talked about those being outside of us, right? In a sense that we weren't somehow implicated, right? And in 1994, it was the first time I really got it, how we are implicated, right? Irrespective of how we identify. I couldn't just say, oh, but I'm a good American, right? That was not good enough. The other thing is that the whole identity politics and intersectionality point these days is, in my opinion, and I don't know if it's taught differently in different places, but from what I've heard and what I've been listening to, it's just been the structural part of intersectionality and identity politics has really been taken out, right? So that intersectionality, just multiple identities with this category, this, and we add up to something, right? With not much recognition that our identities are always political, and that our identities are not necessarily the categories that we're assigned. right? And so, that's really important. So I think people have, I think, well, let me say what I want, not just what I think. I would like you all to really consider this question of identity, right? Who are you? And I've heard used interchangeably identity and classification, right? The categories. And when I think about identity, it's it's the features of my existence that I claim. Right? I also need to acknowledge the categories, but I don't need to embrace them as part of my identity. Right? So that's something. And then if we were to, and I'm speaking for the whole group, but I'm actually not. But if I were to write this rewrite the statement, I would keep most of it, but I would absolutely include in the statement, and this goes to the identity and the structural, questions, that we would have to somehow also, even as Black folks, think about our role as part of the colonizing project. Right? Yes, we were brought and dragged or shipped, involuntarily. Nonetheless, we're part of the project, and there's specific examples also of, where there are Black towns, all Black towns, right? To get to that, you had to be some part of the colonizing project, I think. So that's something that I would like to acknowledge. And then also that all these forces are bigger than the bodies that are conducting them. So I'm thinking about Black folks, formerly enslaved Black folks who went to Liberia, right, and colonized Liberia, and the 20-year civil war in Liberia and Sierra Leone was in Liberia. The elites were the American Liberians, against the indigenous Liberians, right? And so just thinking about, it's not the bodies, right? And I would love it if we could just get away from the bodies and really think about the structures and processes that create the outcomes that we're really struggling against. And take into account the North in the global South, and the global South in the global North, right? These clear lines that we made between North and South, Black and white, etc., those to me no longer make sense. And I think I would like us to have a more kind of a nuanced understanding of power and the interests of the elite. I was really shocked to hear from my Afghan sister that the Taliban are absolutely locking arms with the US, but in an undercover way. Right? So publicly, the US saying Taliban this and that, right? But in undercover, and their material interests have really aligned, right? So that they're protecting each other. And of course, part of the very bad impact is on the Afghan women, right? So on the one hand, the US is saying, stop Afghan, Taliban. And on the other hand, the US is very much in cahoots around the natural resources. So I'm going to stop now because I'm just kind of just talking about things that I'm interested in. And one other thing, so I want to say is, as you might know, there have been so many people killed in Palestine. Just yesterday, there were 7 more killed in Jenin. And and this is the part of category of nation, that the occupation would not be possible without the US complicity, right? Military, ideological, etc. So when we talk about identities and power, I think it's really important for us to recognize the ways in which this category of nation matters, right? But when it comes to Palestinian people, the category, the US passport, if you have a West Bank ID, for example, the US passport doesn't count for very much, right? You still can't use the main airport. You still have to go to Jordan, spend the night, get on your flight. You still can't go to Jerusalem, right? So it's this really interesting way, and I want to think more about this, right? About this category of nation and what it means and how it plays out differently in different people and different people's origins. If you're, yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. It's really kind of intense being here. Today there was a big strike, and something that most people don't see, because you only hear about the killing, is that whenever there's a killing like there has been, there's usually a national strike. What that means is that businesses close, schools close, many things come to a standstill, which means that children are not learning as they should be. The small businesses are not, it's wrecking the economy as well in a very different way. So yeah, I'll just stop here. I'm kind of I need to take a breath. So tell me,
Right.
Kim, if I hit the right notes
Oh,
or
yeah. I think it's beautiful, actually, that you operate at such an intersectional level of analysis. You operate at this international level of analysis, and it kind of all comes through you simultaneously. And so, absolutely, it's appropriate that we be emotional with this new news from Palestine. I actually didn't realize that you were going to be zooming in directly from Palestine. So thank you for being here once again. We're really privileged to have you with us. If we could rewind to Combahee just a little bit, though, I do have, we don't get to hear about Black history that much in Hawaii, to be really frank. Black History Month is not celebrated in Hawaii the way that it is in the US. And I think that it's, I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to the decision for the title, especially for my African-American history students. I think it's very powerful.
the Combahee River?
Yes.
Okay, that was a place where Harriet Tubman fought a very important battle. She was a battle that enabled very many Black folks, right, to get out of slavery, and it was a very militant act, right, and it was a very important decision point in the Combahee River Collective, what became the Combahee River Collective. We had our first autonomous retreat. We used to meet at, there was an important professor from Mount Holyoke College named Professor Jean Grotholz. She was a political science professor of Barbara Smith. She used to let us use her, nice house to have the retreat. But for our first retreat, we went to Wellfleet, Massachusetts on the Cape Cod. You can believe it. We were all squished together in one motel room. There were maybe 6 of us at that gathering. But we had a discussion about how we should name ourselves. And some members said, "Oh, we should call ourselves Sienna, because that's a color, right?" And there was a range of us, the range of skin tones, right? And she thought this would be a nice way to capture, I guess, our physicality. And then, but then Barbara said, wait a minute, no way, you know, we are political, and we should name ourselves after the, not after Harriet Tubman, but the event, right, that kind of captured a Black woman leading this campaign that led to some really amazing things that couldn't have been predicted, right? And so we thought of ourselves as activists, and we were, right? We were taking action on various things, right? We were militant, but not necessarily in armed struggle or anything like that. But we weren't just writing about things, right? And so that image of her, you know, leading that charge at the Combahee River Collective, which is a river, actual river in South Carolina, just kind of caught our imagination. And that's how we became the Combahee River Collective and not Sienna Collective.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, you know, as a history professor, I just love it when we have activism that is really historically minded like that. We have, you know, present day actions that are lifting up these historical moments that we want to make sure people remember.
Yeah, and also, can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
Is that, you know, back then, there was no such thing as Black women's studies, and there weren't, you know, Black women's studies textbooks or anything like that. Most of what we learned, apart from, you know, Rhett Marx or some other sociological theory, was through Black women's fiction, right? And that's important. Of course, Toni Morrison, Toni Cade Bambara, Alice Walker, but also, you know, the Black women activists who were talking about intersectionality long before us or Kimberly Crenshaw, right? And so just go to your history book, find out, you know, what these women were writing about. It was about being both Black and women, right? So intersectionality didn't start with us or Kimberly Crenshaw. It started way before, and it started in other parts of the world as well, right? Where women in the Caribbean were thinking about and writing about being Black and women. Claudia Jones is one of those people.
Awesome.
Okay, that's, yeah.
I wanted to see if Daphne, Sean, either of you like to ask your question for Dr. Okazawa-Rey?
Yeah, and so sorry, I have a cold, so that's why I'm like a little bit raspy.
You sound fine.
Daphne, you go first. I'm completely intimidated. So.
Oh, Sean, you're here. You showed up. All right.
Daphne, do you have your question ready?
I feel like she answered most of it though.
Okay. All right. What any of the other students, Caleb, would you like to ask?
Oh, wait. She
Okay,
answered most of it, but I want to hear from you one question. I want to hear your voice asking one question. So I won't answer it, but it's nice to hear your voice.
All
What's
right.
the burning question?
I forgot what I wrote. I'll be right back.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot. But while you're thinking, I also want to really acknowledge Mari Matsuda, who you are one of my people I look up to, and I want to be like you when I grow up. Your artwork, your scholarship, everything. Kim has sent us photos of your exhibition and stuff. So this is just a deep sign of respect from me and from people in Women for Genuine Security and the International Women's Network. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. All right, come on with the questions.
Well, this was based on a reading. I like the line where it says Black feminists often talk about their feelings of craziness. What are the feelings of craziness that you or they talk about?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, when you don't fit neatly into a category, right? Something that happens, and first of all, the assumption is that everybody should fit neatly into some category, which is actually a lie in itself, but we internalize it through our socialization, right? So there are essentialist ways to think about who's a Black woman, essentialist ways to think about who is this and that. Because we were not only Black and women, we were also lesbians. And at the time, to be out like we were, it was big, right? And so we had to deal with the homophobia and heterosexism in Black communities that we were part of. And then deal with the racism in the white women's section of the women's movement. And please leave here knowing that the women's movement was not white women's movement. There were so many women of color involved in different ways. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, so there was a way in which we didn't really fit neatly into any category. When we came together, I'll never forget the first meeting that I went to, which was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the apartment of Helen Stewart, who actually lived in Honolulu. She was a doctoral student at Brandeis at the time. Anyway, you know, just looking around and thinking, oh my goodness, this is really something. And when we started talking, getting, you know, affirmation of our experiences, or you know, having our experiences reflected back to us, right? It's a kind of recognition and acknowledgement that I think we need as human beings. To be recognized and acknowledged for exactly who we are, to the best that another human being can do it, right? It's hard for us to do it as individuals because we could just be delusional, right? So we need each other, you know, we need each other. And that's what Claudia Rankine says, right? Why are we here? Because we need each other. And so that's and you know, we read the book Sula at the time that I think that had just come out recently. And you know, Sula was also, she was kind of like our, I don't know what you call it, but somebody we identified with because she didn't really fit in either. Right? She was described as crazy. Right? So if you don't remember that, go back and read that book. So yeah, that's the craziness, you know, that was both internalized in some way and also put on us by the structures, by people within even our own communities, right? And the thing about being out was that we weren't really out, like, yeah, we're lesbians like this. No, it was more subtle, right? We didn't hide it, let's say, right? Because there was a time, you know, when lesbians would use the male pronoun when they're talking about their girlfriend. You know, my boyfriend or he, you know, la la la. I went on a date and he, you know, instead of she, right? There was no they category back then, by the way. Yeah, so anyway, I'm rambling. Another question, as they say, hit me up.
Sean, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, Dr. Compoc. I'm gonna say,
Come on back, Sean. Now I get to see you. You got to wherever you were going.
I got the campus. I'm on campus. So I was just really, I don't know where to go. I mean, it just seems so mundane compared to your what you talked about. But setting aside a moment, institutional and systemic racism is the mainstream media and the contemporary narrative. Is it a dialogue of determinism, meaning even when the narrative is not based on the threat or criminality of Blacks, the narrative is one of lack of representation, education, economic disparity. Not very optimistic, not a very optimistic picture. What do you think the impact is social, psychologically? And I'm going to preface that with, you talked about internalization, so that's where I was kind of going with. And how does that affect how we move through the society?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and first of all, even though intellectually we know that all this stuff is socially constructed, the social constructionist people, the people who constructed these categories in the first place, and then who are, continuing and only altering a little bit. If you ever saw that documentary called Ethnic Notions, you can see how these stereotypes developed over time, right? A brilliant documentary, by the way. I think there's at least two sides to this question, right? So one is the dominant stories that are told about us, right? And the power with which it's told, right? One of the best definitions of power I ever heard was, power is when you get to define reality. That's when you know it's powerful. That you're powerful. So thinking about the domination part of it, but also the reason these relationships exist, from my understanding, is that it's fundamentally about resources, right? What's valuable, who has access, who's going to control them, right? How are they going to be distributed? And resources could be material resources, but they could also be resources like esteem, right? How we feel about ourselves. Only certain people can feel good about themselves, right? Not other people, right? It's a whole kind of politics of scarcity, where the assumption is there's not enough of anything to go around. And more than that, we're not going to share, whatever it is. And this is a kind of a looking internally to Black communities, communities of color. Think about when we've been in rooms, we're talking about pain, right? And somebody else starts talking about pain. Let's say we're in a multiracial group, right? We Black folks are talking about pain, and then somebody else starts talking about it. And then we're like, wait a minute, we got more pain than you. Sean, you're smiling. You know this, right?
Yes, I know this.
You know this, right? And so that kind of trading in pain, right, is something that we've done a lot of. And now I'm talking about in spaces with Black folks and when we mix with other people, right? And I've been thinking, and then the other part of that is, what's being called this call out culture, calling out all of that. You have to be precise in your use of pronouns or how you talk about race or any of this stuff, right? If you don't, you get thrown out, literally or figuratively. And so I'm thinking about the ways we've internalized the negative stories and the trauma and all that with the ways we treat each other. And it could be our own Black folks, or it could be other people of color, or it could be anybody, right? That if we start from a place of pain, right, then I think we're going to continue in that path. That's one part. the other thing I've been thinking about is that all of us have doo-doo parts, parts that aren't so nice, the parts where we live with contradictions, the parts of us that haven't been developed in ways that we would like to be, fully human, right? And I've been thinking about using, instead of calling out and being so hypercritical, and by the way, my generation of academics have a lot of responsibility for teaching mostly criticism and not enough thinking generatively about what do we want to create? Who do we want to become, right? It's just critique, critique, critique. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation as well. We could have a whole session about that. What if we thought about our movements, our organizational spaces, our classrooms as compost bins, right? That we are all organic. That means every part of us is valuable, right? And we need to construct a compost bin where we can put in the organic parts that no longer serve us. But if we, given the right set of conditions, can create rich soil from which we can grow individually, collectively, grow ideas, grow our imagination. Instead of just throwing out or saying about ourselves, oh, I don't like that about myself. And Sean, you said this, you said, oh, my question might be too mundane, that's part of that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking to you with love. You know that, right?
I hear you. I'm listening.
Okay. Okay, good.
And that's
I feel you even on Zoom.
That's what you said where the place that I'm at is that I've been in the pain long enough, and now it's time something to flourish from that, and
yes. And who could we be if we started from another place besides pain? It doesn't mean that you deny the pain is not, you don't deny the pain. You don't deny the history, right? But for a second, maybe start in a slightly different place. For example, asking a question like, what makes you come alive? Right? Instead of, how did this person try to destroy you? Right? What's the microaggression that you faced on your way to class?
I will say that I won't take up any more of your time so the other guys, so my other classmates can answer. But I would say I'm my own worst enemy in that respect. So I'm going to say that I think if I start right here, I'm gonna.
Yeah, and Sean, stop using that military term.
I'm a military brat, but what did I say?
That's okay. That's okay. Just compost it. I'm just kidding. Other questions? I'm having a blast. I don't know about you all. Tell me to focus if you want me to focus.
Go ahead, Caleb.
All right, hello. My question is going to be coming from the Combahee River Collective. The reading that we had for class, there's one sentence that really caught my attention just because it showed the amount of drastic change that would be needed in order to bring about, this kind of equality. And it says, we realize that the liberation of all oppressed peoples necessitates the destruction of the political economic systems of capitalism and imperialism, as well as patriarchy. My question coming from that is, with this in mind, and with how drastic these changes would be, is it possible to achieve liberation for all oppressed peoples in America? And if so, how can one bring about the necessary social and political economic changes that will allow for that level of liberation?
I think we can't liberate people in America, as you say, until we liberate everybody. Right? Because the structures that we talked about are not just in the US, right? And we see that more and more. Right? It's the same forces of capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy, heterosexism, caste oppression, right? Those are specific, they're manifested specifically in different locations, right? But the processes are interlocking in a sense. They're very similar. They operate differently in different contexts, right? But capitalism, imperialism, all those things have in mind beneficiaries, people who are going to benefit ultimately, right? So and this is why I've been on now for many years, that our struggle as Black folks, as any marginalized folks in the US, cannot be just about the US. It can't, right? And I think this is where, and this is the self-criticism, for us in the movement, is that we US kind of operates on an American exceptionalism idea. And I think many movement folks here in the US, think about ourselves as exceptions. Black people are the most oppressed, 300 and some number of Black people have been killed by the police, during the year, like all these things as if they are exceptions, right? They're not. They're not exceptions. State violence operates in many places in the world, right? And so what we have to understand is why is the state the only legitimate purveyors of violence, that they can do it with complete impunity, as you see here in Palestine, other places, right? And what role does the police and the state play in protecting the interests of the elite? Not just in the US, but in many places around the world. So I think that's really important, right? And we talked about the destruction. What we also need to talk about, even in a bigger way, is what we're trying to create. And kind of going back to Sean's point earlier, is part of the oppression and the domination is that we've been really conditioned not to imagine, right? That our imagination, our creativity, all those things have really been suppressed and replaced in some ways by fear and the politics of scarcity, right? And feeling paralyzed, feeling alienated, all those things. Right? And the question for all of us is, what are the conditions, that will help us really regain our ability to imagine? Because we all have them, right? And as Toni Morrison said when she wrote that book, after she wrote that book, Paradise, she said, if you can't imagine it, you can't have it, right? So if we can't imagine what we want to create that would be liberatory for the whole world and the planet, not just the people, right? But all living things where we can all thrive, not just survive, right? How would we have to come together collectively across national borders, because they're also made up, right? And equally important, this is a question I've been thinking a lot about lately, is who do we also have to become? Right? Who do we also have to become so that we don't end up recreating the same mess that we just struggled so hard to change, think of all the movements, you know, the progressive, radical, think of decolonial, you know, projects and everything where folks ended up recreating the same mess, right? So my kind of burning question has been, how do we work together collectively? How do we organize our movements so that our personal transformation is very much interlinked or related? I don't know what the right word is, but together with the change, the material conditions we're trying to change, the structural transformation that we're trying to do, all those things. I think they have to somehow really go together. That you know, as Grace Lee Boggs, you know, talked about engaging the head, heart, and hands. Typically, it's just been engaging the head. You know, the right analysis. It's actually been a technical, rational way of movement work, right? Analyze the problem, then we get the right tool, and then we're going to fix it, whatever the it is. Right? So how do we not just fix something, but how do we transform both the conditions that have created the mess and at the same time transform ourselves, rehumanize ourselves, right, in ways that we need to so we don't end up recreating, right? And you know Grace Lee Boggs, maybe you know her work. She was a diehard Marxist, right? Very cerebral, intellectual, analytical. I mean, really, if you ever heard her speaking, when I met her, she was maybe 80. I met her on her 80th birthday. Right? By the time she was moved toward the end of her life, she was talking about growing our souls. And if anybody heard her speak more latterly in her life, you would hear, you know, her say that. And you think, wow, you know, she's saying that? There must be something true about that because she was like hardcore, right? Those of you who've read her work. This is what we have to do. Like think about, this is the compost bin. Right? What conditions could we create together so that we can grow our souls, grow our hearts, right, as well as our mind, in a way that we can actually create what we imagine. We can imagine, we can create it, and we can live in it and not take it all the way back, right? Also, the stuff didn't happen overnight, right? And part of what we're going to have to do, part of the transformation of ourselves, is getting rid of this McDonald's mentality. You know, drive up, order, get your food, and then we're done. Right? That this process has taken hundreds of years. It's going to take, you know, a lot of good methodologies, patience, time to transform it. We can't just do quick fixes, and we can't just destroy stuff, in my opinion. We have to be about the business of creating, imagining and creating.
All right. We have just one last question, and then Monisha, I see you. We'll go to your question.
Monisha, hi.
I want to pivot to Palestine. One of the students actually wanted to ask, can you speak about feminism in Palestine? What have you learned about the feminist struggle in Palestine?
Feminism in Palestine has existed for a long time, first of all. Right. So that's important. Can I just take a...
Yes.
Yeah. It's been around for a long time, long before the contemporary, the women's movement right now, right? There were different formations, and one of the most important ones in the modern history is an organization that was called the General Union of Palestinian Women. And many of the Palestinian feminists, what's that term? Well, they learned how to, they learned about feminism, they taught each other about feminism. What's important about Palestinian feminism is that it's always talking about both the colonization and occupation and patriarchy, right? It's not just liberal feminism where, Palestinian women should have equal access, right? That's true, but it's also always tied to decolonization and Palestinian people becoming a state, right? So that's important. A lot of the feminist work has been around NGOs and international NGOs. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing in Palestine, right? So if you know anything about this place, most of the economy of Palestine is dependent on international NGOs and NGOs that are funded by international donors, right? So there are a lot of European donors who give money to local NGOs, and then there are international NGOs who are also present. They're an important part of the economy of this location, right? If all the NGOs left, if all the INGOs left, international organizations left, and if all the local NGOs were defunded by the funders, there would be a big collapse in the economy. Because under occupation, there's not an opportunity to develop economically in the ways that other places may have, right? Because there's really also not a very viable state, right? There's a lot of internal strife right now. And so the feminism, that I'm familiar with, that feminism I've been involved with, is always concerned about both. There was a moment right after Oslo, and this kind of started in 1994. There was a feminist recognized that the project of state building also had to include the liberation of women, right? And so they organized grassroots feminists and women in NGOs, organized something called the Palestinian Model Parliament, right? Where they had a series of organizing events and some other big kind of general events to push, the new government to really consider the role of women in the society and from enfranchisement, to the deep cultural patriarchal norms that still exist, right? And in that instance, they learned even the left parties went against them, right? And there's a book that I helped to work on called the Palestinian Model Parliament. If you send me an email, I'm happy to get you access to it. That talks about this process of how the feminists organized and the kind of backlash they got from the political Islamists, the left parties, the media, everybody. So in that moment where it was one of those times where it could have gone one way, but it went the way that really undermined the women's movement, right? They saw what they were up against. And so, they of course had to change their organizing tactics and stuff, right? And I would say is in this moment, right? The feminist movement is, just kind of, they're doing women's rights stuff, but whenever the occupation intensifies, right, there's a kind of conservatism that also kind of sets into the larger society, right? People become more afraid, etc. One other thing that I was here in 2006 when after Arafat died, there was an election in spring of 2006. And one of the very interesting things was that the only group, the only political party that explicitly talked about women was Hamas. Vote for us, we'll protect you. It wasn't in a liberatory sense, but it was the only party that specifically said, women, we want your vote, and if you vote for us, you will get this. Right? Which was surprising to many. And a lot of people voted for Hamas who were not necessarily Muslim, right? There's still Christian people here, right? But we were surprised at how many women actually voted for Hamas. Great. So what's the point I'm trying to make here is that it's like in many other places, right? Just being left doesn't necessarily make you feminist, right? And that's important, as we've seen here in Palestine. Just being feminist doesn't necessarily make you create a movement that can win the hearts and minds of people, of local people. There's so many elements, and that I think at the end of the day, the main thing here is to stop the killing, right? Stop the taking of land, and recognizing that as the occupation intensifies, so does the violence against women. Because the economy, gets worse, et cetera, et cetera. You know that analysis. But that's the story. So all that to say, things are very intense here.
Go ahead, Monisha.
Oh no, Monisha. I know you were gonna
Margo.
ask me a really hard question too.
No, I'm not going to ask you any hard questions at all, Margo. It's just, I can't think of a better person to spend and celebrate International Women's Day with. I just wanted to share a couple of things. Margo and I overlapped a little bit in Boston, and she organized this extraordinary event that has been so impactful for my life. And that was bringing Korean women who worked in the camp towns to Boston. And she organized this huge event based in the community with translators. This was in the early 90s, Margo. And, we really, for the first time, started to sort of, intensify those conversations about militarization, inserting nation as a category, as Margo was saying, and sort of connecting sexual violence, the sexual economy, and militarization in these, enormously important ways that have been extremely influential. So, maybe Margo can talk a little bit about it. And if I could, just share a couple of resources. There's a video archive in which Margo has an interview with Linda Carty and Chandra Mohanty, and that's an enormously important resource. My students selected, voluntarily, and they're so inspired by Margo's analysis and work. And also Emily Thuma's All Our Trials, which documents, that period that Margo was talking about in Boston, where Black women were being killed, and the kind of on-the-ground work that Combahee River Collective members did at that time with the safe houses, with, sort of all kinds of community-based organizing against police violence against women, Black women especially. So just, the testament to your work and, your everything that you also said at the Black Women in the Academy, defending our name, your interventions there.
my God.
Yeah, Margo. I mean, these are stories that inform our work today and, your enormous influence and love. We've just benefited from your love and friendship and, from so far away.
I didn't know you were at those events. And I think those are examples of just doing what needed to be done. When I did my research in Korea, I ended up doing it actually on the mixed race children who had been abandoned by their US military fathers, right? And it raised real important questions about what could I write about, as an outsider. And I had this idea that most people in the US would never know the story of the women in prostitution around the US military bases, right? And I met somebody very important named Miss Kim Yeon-da, who was a former bar woman, as she describes herself. And I met also Anil Soon, who is a fiction writer and an artist who had written about those women. And we decided that they should come and tell their stories themselves, right? And so we organized with people in different parts of the country, those two, plus there was a young Korean adoptee, because that's another part of the story of the Korean War and all of that. So there was a speaking tour. And Monisha, I'm so glad you still remember that, because what's important about it is those women who were in prostitution and they were actually forced into prostitution by the Korean government during the Korean War, right? It was kind of a continuation of the Japanese comfort women system. But some of those women ended up in what was referred to the Kijichan, which is town around the bases. They just won a year ago a lawsuit against the Korean government, right? Because the Korean government worked hand in hand with the US military to set up these establishments so that Korea could get the US dollars, right, to build their state. It was part of the state building project. So they won, there was a celebration. I'll send you the information about it. So it was a huge victory, right? So there can be justice in different ways. Thanks for that reminder. I've forgotten all about it. Both of those things, the Black Women in the Academy as well. And I love but we actually met in Syracuse. Right.
We're actually at the last 5 minutes. We only have our ASL folks for that long. So if anybody has any last comments or questions they would like to offer, any other words of love?
Hi, Dr. Okazawa-Rey. My name is LaJoya Shelley. I'm coming to you from UH Manoa. I just want to know what sustained you? How have you lasted this long in this work? And what can you say to those of us who are just beginning on our journey? How do we stay in the fight? And really, how do we stay hopeful? Because I think for you to have done this work for so long, you've had to have maintained hope. So how can we do that?
First of all, stay connected to each other. Once we get isolated, then we're going to be alienated, depressed, and down and out, right? So one thing is staying connected. And it doesn't mean you have to see people every single day, right? But knowing that Monisha is out there, Kim is out there, Joy, Mari, all these people are there. It's not immediate kind of connection, right? And I've never even met Mari, but I know that she's there, she's done the work, right? She's doing the work, the artwork, everything. So that's one thing. It's all about relationships for me. It's what I've come to learn. And that what I've also come to learn, and this is going to sound cheesy, my students have told me this, but I think for me, I've come to realize that I do the work because I love life. I love being alive. I love people. And that I don't think love is cheesy, right? And so, for me, that's the source, the deep source. And I've only come to realize this in the last few years, right? That's been the source. When I, just give you a quick story, I got lost in Jerusalem today trying to find a friend's house. And so I went to the grocery store and I asked the guy if he could call my friend. And we were having a little chat and I said to him, I'm really sorry about what's happening and my government, etc. And he said, it's tough, it's not a fair world. Life isn't fair, he said. And I said to him, I looked at him, he had the most amazing blue eyes, amazing, just gorgeous, very powerful. And I said, life isn't fair, but look, you and I connected. And he smiled, I smiled. It sounded so corny, but I really meant it. I got to my place and we had a nice little conversation. I think he felt the same as well. Like there was it's those little things that have always, given me hope. And also knowing that you all in Hawaii are doing your campaign, that people in Myanmar, I know, are doing their campaign, Palestine, everywhere, that it's humility, right? That is, for me, humility is really getting it that we are part of a bigger story and that it's not all about us, right? But it is about how we connect with each other, with ideas, the planet. All that gives me hope, and you should have seen me in my 20s, I was awful. If I can change, then I know that change is possible. One other thing that gives me hope is that my demographic, my mother and father were never meant to get together. They did. I wasn't supposed to exist. I do exist. So I know many things that are not supposed to exist do exist and it's possible. That's another source of my hope. Main thing, love, connection. Love life, connect with each other, and look for the good stuff. I'm also a Buddhist, right? The Buddhist principle is whatever you focus on is what's going to grow. So I try to focus on the good stuff.
I just want you to know, Margo, LaJoy is too shy to say it out loud, but she's one of the co-founders of a brand new Black women's graduate organization at UH Manoa Sister Circle. And so great to see you, LaJoya, and just lift up.
Yes, hit me up.
You're
Come
doing.
on, send me an email. We got to do one thing before we close. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, that's right. So first, can we just say thank you to Kate and Sarah for our ASL. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Kim for organizing us.
Thank you.
And
Thank
everybody who made this possible.
You want to play us a song? Is that right, Margo?
Yes, so everybody's going to stand up now. We've been sitting too long.
Okay.
In a time of an upheaval will come a transformation.
Stand up, stand up.
Ignite a fire that will burn like the sun. Become a strong movement, fierce and determined, informed by where we are and where we've come from. We are those who are rising from Manila to Miami, building trust and solidarity. Love is our bond. And in the streets we are marching to end the rape and the suffering, to stop the fascist tyranny. Organize as one. We are rising. We are rising. We are rising now. And in this life. From those who dare to interrupt the violence, to those who expose the truth and break the silence, warriors who work to open up the prison bars, valiant souls who stand up against the unjust wars, multitudes who defy walls along the border, masses who unify to protect our water, rebel minds who unionize for workers' rights, fearless hearts who fight to defend trans lives, those who take back their land and their health, those who seek to redistribute the wealth, youth who demand a right to education, those who reclaim political power in their nation. We cry out, say her name. We chant love, trust, hate, and we will not be erased. It's we who decide our fate. We are rising. We are rising. We are rising now. And in this life, we are rising. We are rising. We are rising now. And in this life, we are women who endured violence and degradation, slavery, trafficking and mutilation, rape and abuse, racist discrimination, those who survived labor exploitation, colonization and gentrification, imprisonment, migration and militarization, homophobia and transphobic aggression, violence by police, reproductive oppression. But from the pain we will open eyes, awaken hearts and awaken minds, and our demands we intensify. Strategically we are organized, together we can raise the vibration through our action and imagination, respect, trust and communication, and love for our future generations. Intersectional, inclusive we come, collective power is how this is won. We keep it rising like the fire of the sun. We will rise like the sun, we will rise like the sun.
Woo! Oh, that was so awesome. I just have to recognize also Dr. Chuck Lawrence is on with Mari Matsuda. For those of you who enjoyed yourselves today, April 12, please mark your calendars. Dr. Lawrence is going to be our next speaker in this series.
Oh my gosh. You know, Sarah was my professor at Harvard. I was one of the Sarah Lightfoot Fellows. Oh my God.
Such a small world. This is so awesome. Thanks all of you for coming today. It was so great. This was such a great feeling.
Wow. Hey, somebody take a screenshot, please.
I'm doing it right now.
This is so great. I mean, come on, let's get with it.
Here, I'm going to pin the two of you so that we can have a really awesome photo. Ready? One,
Love you, Margo.
2, 3, smile.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. Yay.
Thank you.
Amazing. Charles Lawrence, I've been hearing about you from your sister since the 80s.
Yeah, the 70s probably.
No, I went to Harvard at 82, in the fall of 82.
When
That's when I met her.
talking about you were in Boston, I thought, and earlier than that.
Oh yeah, I was in the 70s, but I didn't. I didn't go to grad school, get my doctorate until I was in my 30s.
Because I was principal of Highland Park Free School in Roxbury from 69 to
You
70.
were?
Yeah.
Well, that's where we had the literacy project also in Highland Park.
What?
We had before I went to the ed school,
Yeah.
we ran a women's adult literacy project in Highland Park
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
on
And
the hill, Fort Hill.
Byron Rushing lived up there too.
Yes, exactly.
I was
Oh
living
my
on
God.
Street.
Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. Oof.
Yeah, so the world is full of amazing people and we're all gonna fight back and we're gonna win. Yeah, we'll
Oh
follow you.
yeah, and we're gonna love each other. And Mari, your artwork. Oh my goodness.
Actually, Mari, can you do a shout out for the event tonight?
Yeah, tonight, 6 p.m. at Alpuni Space. Please join us. We'll be talking about how we change the world. I think Joy's going to be there speaking, and a bunch of young activists, and the historian Christina Heatherton. So please join us.
I'm speaking? Okay.
For folks who don't know, Mari did an amazing art installation about radical women in 1945. Is that right?
Yeah.
Using junk, right? Junk.
Yeah,
I love it.
Mari just did a portrait of you while she was watching you.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I cannot believe it. And you know, it is, let's see, what's it? It's about 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for doing it. So
I love it.
I'll talk to Sarah tomorrow. I'll tell her I saw you.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please. She was so, you know, that Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot Fellowship that she created after she got the MacArthur just went so far for me, you know, to help me kind of bridge the economic part of things. And of course, all her teaching and stuff too, of course. But yes, please give her my love.
I will.
And we had the Okinawan connection too. Yay.
Uchinan Shu. Yeah. Christina Heatherton, the scholar who's speaking tonight, is half Uchinan Shu.
Oh, okay.
We'll talk about radical Okinawan immigrants involved with the Mexican Revolution. So, yeah.
This is why life is so amazing. You learn stuff all the time.
Yeah, we gotta stick around because life is amazing.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Joy, for bringing me, and Kim for bringing me. Monisha, great to see you. And the other two of you, I don't know you, but thanks
Margo,
for staying
I want
on.
to make sure you know both of these women have their cameras on. Cindy Franklin is a voice of conscience on Palestine here in Hawaii and is a major leader in keeping our connections between Hawaii and Palestine really strong. And Ihilani is another voice of conscience on multiple issues, including Palestine, and a gifted rapper. So we are just, and Sam also is part of Women's Voices. Nick is well, you know, our amazing.
Wow, amazing.
Kiai for Guahan. Thank you, Iris. Iris is going to be coming with us to the Philippines. So we are just exciting things happening here in this room.
So we just got $15,000 for the Philippines.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. Yep. So anyway, wow, I hope I can come to Hawaii to meet you all in person. That would be a blast.
Please do.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
let's keep the Palestine connection going. If you all would just email me and, you know, let's see how we can make this happen. I'm here a lot during the year. So
Brilliant.
good.
Yes. Thank
Margo,
you.
we'll figure out a way to bring you out.
Okay.
Hawaii.
And Chuck
And-
and
oh.
Mari, you have a blazing. You have a blazing baby.
You
Me
mean-
too, boy. It's really
We love
something.
Blazins.
These people know Kimi, you know, so she's carrying on.
I know. I know.
Margo,
I
one
love
last
it.
thing. Can you tell us the name of that amazing song you shared at the end?
Yeah, We Are Rising. It was written and performed for Eve Ensler's 1 Billion Rising project. It's their theme song.
Oh, okay.
And I'll send you the Spotify link so you can just put it. I just think it's such a brilliant, you know, piece of music, really. I'll put the link in the chat.
Oh, okay. And Ihilani has a new album on Spotify. We'll send that to you.
Okay, please. Because, you know, I have my weekly transnational dance parties. And we're always looking for good music.
Awesome. Yeah. And if folks are interested, Margo has an interview, yes, with a Palestinian Israeli Knesset member on her radio show last month. Isn't that right, Margo?
I didn't do it, but it's on
okay.
our program. Yes.
Well, we're going to let
And
you.
if you,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, just one other thing, if you know good program ideas, contact me. I'm always looking to do good radio. I'm on Pacifica in KPFA.
Okay. Sounds
Okay.
good.
I'd be game. Thank you so much. Oh my
Thank you,
goodness.
Margo. Thank you. You take care of yourself. Get some rest. It's 4 a.m. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
it is.
Thing.
See ya.
Aloha. Aloha.